title for this film was All the Time in the World, and my specific role in it was cinematographer. The story was set in a dystopian reality where the government has released a drug which has now been banned, but people still take this drug for the benefits but have to deal with the consequences. And for our character, the consequences were a loss of what was real and what was not. So our character's on this drug and he's stalking his dog walker and taking creepy pictures of her, and she finds this out and tries to go get help. But at the end it was all a drug trip and he wakes up to being arrested by the government for taking the drugs. And we had some restrictions trying to get the non-verbal world building because we saw this as building a different reality or future like how Blade Runner does with all its sets and props. So to try and recreate a dystopian reality, we wanted the drug in the film to be a prop which looked like it was from the future. But it didn't portray the right effect on the audience perception, and only having 6 lines to create this world caused some restrictions as well. And a theory which I think linked to our film is Plato's Cave, because Plato's Cave is about how humans, do we stay in the ignorance of the comfortable and the familiar, or do we break out of the cave for enlightenment and the truth? And I think that's why film is so special, because it explores going out of the cave and finding the truth and beauty of the outside world. And showing this in our film, we have the girl entering the house of the man. Even though he's incredibly creepy, she still enters. She leaves the cave. But because our film ends with our antagonist just waking up from the drug trip, this search for the truth by our girl protagonist has ended. I would liked at the end of our film for our female protagonist to get revenge and find the truth on our antagonist by doing something, because I think it would have stuck to Plato's Cave more. And having the female protagonist defeat the evil would have been nice, and it's allowing women to be the hero, like in films like Lady Snowblood or Alien, which is something that needs to happen more in the industry to consider the culture of more people. And as the role of the cinematographer, it's my role to create the look of the film, but it's also to get the right shots which serve the script. So of course you get the right settings for the camera, you shoot in 24 FPS to not get light flickering problems, you do the white balance correctly so there isn't any colour tint, the right ISO so there isn't any noise, and the right iris for light and depth of field uses. But what was new for this film was trying to use my methods and to use the camera to tell the story of Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, because it linked to our script in a way. So in our film, when the girl gets the pictures of herself, she has the ordeal part of the hero's journey, and now she's on the road back to get out. So I'd have to film this as girl getting the pictures from somewhere and then finding the doors to get out. And to get these shots right and to make sense, I would use continuity style, which I read about shot by shot, which is visual recognition between shots and the narrative logic, 2 ideas which work together to get the sense of continuous space. We had narrative logic, but the visual recognition wasn't there, meaning that when the girl looks at where the pictures are, the audience has no visual recognition of where they are hidden in the scene, because we never show the wide of the room and the eye lines are completely off. She looks left, but the pictures are right, so not many shots link very well to create a lack of continuity style, meaning the audience had no sense of space in the scene, meaning the film comes out as more of a camera just filming events that happen in a location, which isn't what you want. So this is something I need to work on. I need to use the camera in a more precise way and work on my film language. But I think if we didn't have problems with actors and their availability, I would be able to use continuity style better, and the film would have had less eyeline problems and the audience would be more comfortable with what they're watching. Another problem is the amount of dead space in the film. I think it's a big problem in student film. There's a lot of scenes where there's nothing happening in the back or foreground, it's dead and it's distracting to the audience. And in the dialogue scene, I tried to avoid this by making each character have their own frame, using a 35mm close to them to try and fill out the frame. And I think it works semi-well, but because it also links to the script showing the isolation the characters are feeling. But the film still contains a lot of dead space, and I think for other projects to avoid this, I would avoid shooting inside. I'm a cinematographer who wants to go out and use the mise-en-scène of the street for the film, like the films of Wong Kar-wai, where he shoots on the streets of Hong Kong, creating these beautiful scenes. Also maybe shooting 4:3 aspect ratio is something I'd like to experiment with, because it creates less space on the screen, so less dead space. But I also think it's a stylistic way to shoot, because in shot by shot again, it shows how different aspect ratios can make one scene look completely different to the other. I think my favourite scene I shot in the film was the scene where our antagonist is taking the pictures of the girl. I told the editors to do this freeze frame effect, because it would avoid seeing her lower half while she was walking in a straight line, which was hard to do, but we managed to get past it. And I really like this scene because it's a classic effect used in film when someone is taking a photo, and I think we recreated it perfectly. And so reviewing the film overall, I personally didn't think the final result was of a high enough standard of how much work we put into it. I think the story didn't have the right beats that a story needs, making working on camera hard again, because I was just filming events inside a location. Nothing really connected, which is why solid story beats are needed, and sticking to the theories of telling stories in film is so important, because it allows me as a cinematographer to easily understand how to serve the script and use continuity style at a better standard. But also overcomplication, using too much of everyone's money for a budget also caused problems, and goes back to Nick Crowley saying less is more, which is what the film brief was supposed to represent. And I think because of the disappointing result of the film, I think it's hard to engage any target audience. I would like to have seen our female protagonist defeat the antagonist at the end of our film, because it's more engaging culturally, because of films like Silence of the Lambs or Halloween, which had the female as the final one standing and gets rid of the stereotype of women need protection when they don't. They can defeat the monster in the hero's journey. And it would have allowed more representation of women in film, which would have engaged a wider audience. I think, yes, in the end the film was a disappointment, but at least we made the mistakes now, and in the future as a group we know when we're going wrong and how to put ourselves on the right track, and for sure we all learnt so much where we continue to apply to our future films. The film was called A Picture of a Dream, and my role in it was scriptwriter. The original story for this film was by a director, and it was my job to turn it into a script. So it was, in a sense, a bit of commission writing, and for this you have to stick to the brief and respect it. And I also had to push ideas and remain creatively open and meet the deadlines to create this story, so the director was happy with it. The story is about our protagonist called Max, who is framed for a murder by his landlady, but the landlady hires someone to infiltrate his dreams of Max with images of this girl who was the one that was murdered. And in the end, all the evidence points to Max to doing it, and he can't actually tell if he did it or not. And by using dreams and imagery, we created this film. So the director created some story elements, and I had to put them into a flowing script. And to start with, I looked at the 7 basic plots by Christopher Booker, and with what elements I had, I thought we could use the tenets of Voyage and Return story for our film, because the protagonist in Voyage and Return is often young and feckless, and what pushes them is often violent and shocking, and the world you encounter is dreamlike, like some of the stuff in our film, and like films like Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland. And these are things which the director in our film wanted, but I didn't want to stick to it all the way. I wanted to use it as a foundation and jumping off point. So instead of our protagonist returning from the voyage in the end, he's even worse in our film than he was in the beginning. So using the Voyage and Return, I turn these dreams our protagonist is having as to what pushes the story forward, and are the exciting incidents in throughout, and they keep returning, pushing the story further and further. And I just had to find the other story beats which worked and fill in the gaps. And the idea of Max, our protagonist, being framed for a murder came from trying to be different and thinking, wouldn't it be cool if the girl in his dreams had been killed at the end and people think it's him, but he didn't even know she was real. And this came from the film Brazil, where the protagonist in that dreams of a girl in the beginning, and she becomes part of the story and is real as the story continues. And it also meant we didn't have to show murder on screen, because I always think it can look cheap in some student films. And the interrogation scene I wanted to include because I think it's one of the best ways to tie loose ends and give exposition in film, because it helps with the theory of Q&A, which is where you want the audience to engage by getting them to ask questions and then answer them later with context. And the idea for this came from the film Shoplifters, which has an interrogation in the final act to answer questions the audience has. And so, for example, in our film, the landlady takes a knife and the audience thinks, why does she take the knife? And in the interrogation scene, that question is answered. But a problem with the interrogation scene was the actor who played the policeman wasn't very good and took the script in the wrong way, so we couldn't use his dialogue. But I had a backup idea where we used crime scene photos to tie the loose ends, and I think this works well in the film, because pictures are also good for exposition and a part of show don't tell in film, to let the audience realise what's happening by themselves. Something which I don't think went well was trying to give reasons for some of the dreams in the final cut, because we got footage of our magician dealing 4 different tarot cards for each different dream, and these cards gave the dreams more sense because they all meant something different and made it clear to the audience their meaning related to the story. But sadly, because of time, they had to be cut, and I got the idea for the tarot cards from To Live and Let Die, the James Bond movie, because they're used in the film as plot points, and I think they're a nice prop to include, especially as they can add to the story flow. And when writing, what I would do differently is to try and get the audience to care more about our protagonist. Seeing as in film, we use the characters more to push the story forward and more as props. But next time I would use the save the cat theory, where you get the protagonist to do something nice in the first act so the audience cares about him. And if audiences care about your lead, then it's easier to engage them, and they care more about the story. And overall, I think the film came out really well. It looked stylistic, and I think the story flowed well, and it may have been a bit hard to understand on the first watch, but I think that was due to having a max of 5 minutes, and I think maybe with a few more minutes it would have been clearer on the first viewing. And also when writing the script, using the 3-act structure allowed me to improve my storytelling ability and help me to understand how to get the story to flow and get the right beats. And I think in the final result you can see that there is the 3-act structure. And I also think the film was quite engaging for audience, because I wrote it in a way where the audience would be asking questions what was happening, and I was showing, not telling them.
which I think is one of the best ways to engage the audience. I think culturally it could have been more engaging, but I think this has to do with the audience not caring about our character, and goes back to getting our protagonist to save the cat and makes the audience engage with the character, and maybe with more time we could develop the culture for our character and make it more culturally engaging. And in the end, I thought the film came out really well, and I think I learned a lot about script writing, maybe found a passion for it. And I think we could have benefited with more time to tell the story, and I think the sound could have been improved, but overall I really enjoyed the final result.